How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about my picks for the best horror movies of 2021. Now, before we get into this, I should like to say that this is a personal list. These are my favorite horror movies, so that obviously does come with a few caveats. One, I haven't seen everything. With a lot of movies being smaller, independent movies that don't necessarily get the best wide releases, and also a bunch of movies coming out on a bunch of different streaming platforms, I just may have not seen a really good movie. So if I missed anything that you guys think was a good movie and you think it should be on this list, feel free to tell me. And also, I do want to say these are my personal opinions. There are some of these movies that I really like that got trashed by some critics, and I still really like them, you know, so these are my opinions. If you don't agree with them, that's okay. Feel free to tell me what you thought in the comments section. I would love to hear your top 10 or some of your favorite movies. Feel free to tell me. And also, it is worth noting that it's 2021, we're still recovering from 2020, so there's a little less movies that were out this year than in previous years, so, you know, we're lucky to at least get these movies that we got. Before we jump into the list proper, here are some honorable mentions. Early on in the year, early 2021, theaters were still really suffering, not everything was opening back up, but we did have two horror movies that kind of braved the storm a little earlier. We had The Unholy with Jeffrey Dean Morgan, and we also had Separation, both of which were okay movies but didn't pan out to be the best things ever, but I still thought they were really fun and worth mentioning. We also got Spiral from the Book of Saw. It was a good kind of Seven-esque take on the Saw franchise. Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson were really good. Sadly, though, the traps kind of take a back seat, and they're not the best traps ever. And there's a few other issues with the plot, but it was still good. Escape Room 2 Tournament of Champions, a fun little sequel. Not the biggest and best thing ever, but there's some fun puzzles in it, and it's worth a watch, especially if you find it streaming somewhere. Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City was fun, not the best thing ever, but a good zombie movie and a lot more faithful to the games than the past adaptations. Speaking of zombies, an animated version of Night of the Living Dead was put out by Warner Brothers, Night of the Animated Dead. That was pretty fun. And we also got two sort of art house movies, Antlers and The Night House, both of which were pretty good, and I liked them in the moment. The thing with these two is they kind of ultimately proved to be a little forgettable, and I mean, I forgot to make reviews for them. You know, it's stuff that I liked in the moment, but just didn't really stick with me over the next couple days, you know, so that's kind of sad. But overall, those movies, honorable mentions. Good enough, but didn't quite crack the list. So let's go ahead and jump into the list proper with number 10. For number 10, we have The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. Now, James Wan sadly had to step back and just be a producer because he's busy with all these other DC projects, but he still kept his eye on this movie and helped it out. And it's not as good as the first two Conjuring movies, but it's different. It feels much more like a case file. They go for a sort of figure out the mystery type element. There's a human villain in this one, a witch, which is very different. And there are some fun scenes towards the end in these tunnels, and you do get the Morgue Man, of course. The Morgue Man is pretty cool and pretty creepy. So even though it's not to the level of the first two, which is why it's only down here at number 10, it's still a fun Conjuring entry, and I definitely really like it. Moving along to number 9. Number 9, we have Don't Breathe Part 2. Don't Breathe 2, it continues the story of the first, but some time has passed, and now the old blind man has a daughter with him. But where did she come from and what's going on with that? Well, eventually, some bad guys break into his house again, and the old blind man is super tough, and it does turn into a little bit of an action movie this time around. And you also get his daughter, who's really prepared as well. But there are some more twists and turns that keep this thing on its head. Really cool. And they really do try to shine this character in a different light. And I thought it was an interesting continuation to the story, you know. So it's pretty fun. Not the best thing ever, but it pulled off the job pretty well. Let's move on to number 8. Number 8, we have Fear Street Part 2, 1978. This is from Netflix, based on the books by R.L. Stine. And I thought parts 1 and parts 3 were okay, but they kind of get bogged down by this magic plot that really just throws in all these extra rules, and it's not great. But part 2 is a much better, straightforward slasher. It's a summer camp slasher, which I feel we don't get enough of nowadays. So a fun summer camp slasher. You have Max from Stranger Things in here. You also get a bunch of music from the 1970s. That was really cool. And a bunch of fun little Easter eggs. You know, 1978, that's the year Halloween came out. The killer wears a cloth sack like Jason in Part 2. You even get one of the nurses quoting Mother Superior from Silent Night, Deadly Night about how punishment is necessary, punishment is good. And yeah, if you're an 80s slasher fan, even though this is 78, but whatever, if you're an 80s slasher fan, definitely gotta go for Fear Street Part 2. If you saw the first one and you weren't a big fan, but you're still a slasher geek, definitely at least watch Part 2. And moving right along to another Netflix movie, this is number 7. Number 7 is Army of the Dead from Zack Snyder. Now, Zack Snyder, you know, for the Dawn of the Dead remake, and even though officially these movies aren't related, if you liked one of them, you'll like the other. This is still fast zombie action, and it really is his big over-the-top style, and it's really, really fun. Now, this time around, the big zombie outbreak starts in Las Vegas, and they wall off the city with shipping containers. Now, one of the casino owners says, I have a lot of money in a vault down there, and if you retrieve it for me, I'll give you a cut. So it's a heist movie breaking into abandoned Las Vegas, and you have Dave Bautista starring. He assembles a crew, and all the different people on his crew are pretty cool. You even get Tig Notaro as the helicopter pilot, and she's really funny as well. But you get a bunch of little things. There's a ton of details in this movie. Classical Greek mythology, a bunch of cool zombie ideas, like, you know, having a zombie hierarchy. That was interesting. But also little blink and you'll miss it things like a robot zombie. Just really quickly, you probably won't notice it. But what the heck was that? We'll have to find out in the spin-off films. Now, there is in this movie what I think is one of my favorite Easter eggs. When they finally get to the vault, if you look in the background, locked up in the vault is the reels for the Snyder Cut of Justice League. That was a funny joke. I really have to hand them for that one. But anyway, let's move along to number 6. Number 6, we have a movie from Shudder. This one's called Jacob's Wife. It's about a woman who's unsatisfied with her life and wants to live a bigger, better, more fulfilling life, and is approached by a vampire. She gets bitten, and as she's starting to turn, she starts to question if her old life was better or if this new, darker life is better. It's someone who needed help but is offered a bad way out of the situation, And what I really like here is they do argue from both sides, you know, and her husband, Jacob, this small town pastor, they really do explain why she fell in love with him and why she wants to stick around, but also why it doesn't work. Plus, we get the return of horror legend Scream Queen Barbara Crampton as the lead, and she's really great as always, so really got to love her in this movie. But yeah, Jacob's Wife for number 6, and moving along to number 5. For number 5, we have A Quiet Place Part 2. This movie really is the one that proves John Krasinski is a good director, and that Part 1 wasn't a fluke, because here we come around with A Quiet Place that's a little bigger, and there's a little more action, but it doesn't go into being a dumb action movie, and it still keeps the tension of the first one. In the first one, their farmhouse had kind of fallen, they had the baby, and they had a technique for fighting these creatures, and they're gonna go off and see the world. They meet with someone they kind of knew before the apocalypse, and the daughter runs off because she thinks she knows where there's a new civilization of people. Now the mom has to protect the youngest baby, and she can't really travel, so she and the son stay behind to defend the base, while this guy that they have to trust to go and bring their daughter back goes off to find her, and when the two are in the wild, they have to decide, do they go back or do they go into the wild farther to try to find what might be a whole community of people living peacefully. So it's an interesting concept, and I do like that when you go bigger, you also make it harder on these characters. You really do put them through a lot, and they have a technique for killing the creatures, but it's not super easy, and they make it into a wider adventure movie. And even though you killed one of them at the end of the last one, these monsters are still threatening, and it really does have a lot of the tension from the first, but on a much wider scale, and John Krasinski definitely pulled it off for the second time around. I'm really curious to see what he does next. Either a different movie or Part 3. I would definitely watch Part 3 of this franchise. A lot to really like here, and the main girl in this movie, the one who can't hear, she really does pull this off. It really did remind me of something like, say, from the Alien franchise, and I would definitely have to say, if you're making something in the Alien franchise, you should probably cast this girl, because she really did pull it off, you know? Anyway, let's move on to number 4. For number 4, I'm giving it to Edgar Wright's Last Night in Soho. This was a great, surrealistic, kind of trippy movie. A girl moves to London to go to fashion school and soon realizes that what she wanted isn't exactly all it's cracked up to be. She moves away from the dorm into this woman's upstairs room, and when she sleeps there, she has visions of someone who lived in the 1960s, a decade she really glamorizes, and this is, of course, Anya Taylor-Joy. Now, in the past, things seem glamorous at first, but of course take a really dark and sick turn, and it gets pretty bad, and things get super creepy here. It does become a really haunting ghost story, but the visuals in this movie are A+. A+ for Edgar Wright here. Everything, there's lots of really cool lighting, mirror effects between the two girls, really just like the ghost effect that you see towards the end of this movie. This movie looks really good, and I really did like it. I was really impressed. Even though it did get to such a deep, dark point, the visuals were crazy, and you did slip into this weird feeling of insanity, you know? Really well-made movie. Glad to see Edgar Wright do a straight horror movie, and it's like, It's like Requiem for a Dream crashed into Suspiria, you know? So, pretty fun movie there. Let's move on to number 3. For number 3, I have to, the horror movie geek in me, the slasher geek, I have to give this to Halloween Kills. This is the sequel to Blumhouse's Halloween. And in this movie, you see Michael Myers at his biggest and toughest and most dangerous. He is super brutal and extreme in this movie. I mean, just fighting the firefighters in the beginning of it, that was tough. That was crazy. But it keeps going from there. We also get returning characters from the first movie. Great to see them. Tons of little nerdy Easter eggs, and I really did like this. Now, there is an element of an angry mob in this movie that not everyone liked, but I think that was really cool because you got to see Michael Myers, not just the people he kills, but his effect on society as a whole, and you really get to see him just tearing down the city. This is Halloween at its biggest and most brutal, and I really did like this movie. Even if not everyone liked it, I thought this was really fun, and I had to give it number 3. Moving on to number 2. Number 2, I'm going to give it to Ghostbusters Afterlife. This is a continuation of the original Ghostbusters continuity, and you get Egon's grandkids moving into his old house after he died. But of course, he was up to something, and it's up to these kids who really don't know anything about Ghost to figure out the mysterious project that Egon was working on, figure out what he was trying to stop, and you do get a bunch of really cool ghost scenes. You get Muncher this time around instead of Slimer. Another really fun ghost there. But of course, you get Paul Rudd in this movie. Paul Rudd plays a teacher. He's hilarious as always, and him and the main girl of this movie really do play off of each other pretty well, and it's really funny, you know. So even though this is a different take, it's Ghostbusters, but with kids, and they're not in New York, they're in the middle of nowhere. Even though it's different, I still really liked it. This is one of the few movies that when I left the theater, I really just wanted to watch it again. So that's the biggest compliment I could give it. And that's why it jumps all the way up to number 2. Even though it is horror comedy and not the biggest horror movie, I had to give it the number 2 spot. But anyway, moving along to number 1, you know, I made this list and I was really obsessing over which order everything should go in. But I think from the very beginning of the list, I knew what was going to get the number 1 spot. So, number 1, we have James Wan's Malignant. I really love this movie. You get James Wan, who had success, critical success, with his Conjuring movies. But rather than just trying to chase the critics, he decided to make the movie that he wanted to make, and he didn't care what those stuffy critics said. This movie is big and over the top and super, super fun. If you're fans of 80s horror, there is a ton of 80s horror throwbacks in here, and I feel like a lot of critics didn't really understand this movie initially. Like when it first came out, they're like, whoa, what's that? But really, this movie goes so much farther and so much bigger than a ton of other movies would dare to go, and you really have to love James Wan for going where other directors wouldn't even dare tread. This movie, you get a woman and her husband, and she wants to have a baby, but the relationship is kind of on the rocks. Later on that night, a mysterious figure breaks in, kills her husband, and almost kills her, but when she wakes up, she has a psychic connection to the killer and starts to see whenever he's about to murder someone. And they're really cool sequences, you know, seeing the world around her fade out. Usually it's just a cut, but here you get to see the world morph into wherever the killer is. The killer's really cool. Big guy with like weird movements in the limbs, and he has a dagger, a golden dagger made out of an award that some doctor won that wronged him. So it's a cool guy with a cool weapon, a really unique design. And even though, you know, I talk about how this is a psychic link movie, it really does play out way better and different than you think it would. And if you guys are 80s horror fans, definitely check it out. There's throwbacks to things, you know, like even Kolchak the Night Strangler in here, or works of early David Cronenberg. There's a whole bunch to like, a whole bunch of different 80s movies tossed in a blender and coming out to this big, unique, and absolutely insane ending. I really do love this movie. This easily my top movie of the year. And I feel a lot of critics when it came out just didn't get it. You know, it goes for it where so many other movies just tame out, you know? And this movie is not tame. And I really do love that. James Wan, easily the best horror movie director working today. And I really loved his newest entry. I really hope he makes more unique films, you know? His career spawned 3 large franchises, Insidious, Saw, and Conjuring, but I love that he made a unique property, and I really want to see what other stories he has to tell, so I love this movie, and I'll be sticking around for whatever he puts out next. Anyway, that's the top 10 of the year. If you guys have any differing of opinions, if there's one of these movies that you felt should be higher or lower, or if there's something I didn't even put on here at all, maybe I didn't see it, definitely leave me your recommendations. And also, since we're at we're talking about 2021 here, what are you looking forward to for 2022? I know personally I'm excited because the new Scream movie is about to come out. I really hope it's good. We'll see. But I'm looking forward to 2022, so tell me, what did you like about 2021? And what are you looking forward to in 2022? Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You're really helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist on the bottom if you guys want to see my reviews for any of these 10 movies in full. This will be my 2021 movies and TV playlist, and every movie that I put in the top 10, I have a full review for, so you can check that out there. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Relevant playlist on the bottom. Have a good day now.